Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Bihari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Ballabha Girivardhari Jasodanandana Braja Janaranjana Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jamuna Tira Vanachari Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Rama Ramo, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Rama Ramo, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Rama Ramo, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ramo, Hare Ramo, Rama Ramo, Hare Hare. Jayam Vishnu Pad Paramahamsa Parivrajagacharya Ashvatara Sadashi Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Founder Acharya of ISKCON Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakori Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakura Ki Jai Prem Sigaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Sri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shamakund Radhakund Giri Govardhana Ki Jai Vrindavana Dham Mathura Rama Ki Jai Yugovardhana Dham Ki Jai Munamayi Gangamayi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Oh gloriously assembled devotees. Oh gloriously assembled devotees. Oh gloriously assembled devotees. Oh glorious to Sri Guru and Gauranga Gaurapimananda Haribo. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Surutasya Pumsham Suchira Shramasya. Shrutasya Pumsham Suchira Shramasya. Nanvanjasha Suribhi Iditorita. Nanvanjasha Suribhi Iditorita. Tattad Gunana Shravanam Mukunda. Tattad Gunana Shravanam Mukunda. Padhara Vindam Hridayeshu Jesham. Padhara Vindam Hridayesham. Shutasya Pumsam Chuchira Sramasya. Nanvanjasha Suribi Iditorita. Tattad Gunana Shravanam Mukunda. Padara Vindam Hridayeshu Jesham. Sutasya Pumsham Suchira Shamasya. Sanvan Ajasa Suribi Iditorita. Tattad Gunanu Shravanam Mukunda. Padara Vindam Hridayeshu Jesham. Ladies. Shutasya Pumsam Suchira Shamasya. Nanvanjasha Suribi Iditorita. Tattad Gunanu Shravanam Kunda. Padara Vindam Hridayeshu Jesham. Chotasya Pumsam Suchira Samasya. Padara Vindam Hridayeshu Yesham. Surutasya, of persons who are in the process of hearing. Umsham, of such persons. Suchira, for a long time. Shramasya, labouring very hard. Nanu, certainly. Anjasha, elaborately. Shuribihi, by pure devotees. Iditaha, explained by. Artaha, statements. Tat, that. Tat, that. Guna, transcendental qualities. Anushravanam, thinking. Mukunda, the personality of Godhead, who awards liberation. So, Para Aravindam, the lotus feet. Hridayeshu, within the heart. Jesham, of them. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. Persons who hear from a spiritual master with great labour and for a long time must hear from the mouths of pure devotees about the character and activities of pure devotees. Pure devotees always think within their hearts of the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead, who awards his devotees liberation. We do it responsively. Persons who hear from a spiritual master with great labour and for a long time must hear from the mouths of pure devotees about the character and activities of pure devotees. Pure devotees always think within their hearts of the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead, who awards his devotees liberation. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. Transcendental students are those who undergo great penance in being trained by hearing the Vedas from a bona fide spiritual master. Not only must they hear about the activities of the Lord, but they must also hear about the transcendental qualities of the devotees who are constantly thinking of the lotus feet of the Lord within their hearts. A pure devotee of the Lord cannot be separated from the lotus feet of the Lord for even a moment. Undoubtedly, the Lord is always within the hearts of all living creatures, but they hardly know it because they are deluded by the illusory material energy. The devotees, however, realize the presence of the Lord, and therefore they can always see the lotus feet of the Lord within their hearts. Such pure devotees of the Lord are as glorious as the Lord. They are, in fact, recommended by the Lord as more worshipable than he himself. Worship of the devotee is more potent than worship of the Lord. It is therefore the duty of the transcendental students to hear of pure devotees, as explained by similar devotees of the Lord, because one cannot explain about the Lord or his devotee unless one happens to be a pure devotee himself. Om Meganati Manandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Jena Tajmai Shri Gurave Namaha Vanchakopa Taruviyascha Kripa Sindhuevacha Haritanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. So, there's so many things in this verse and in Prabhupada's purport. I'm hoping I can get a couple of ideas that I can share with your permission, with your blessings. It talks here of people hearing from the spiritual master with great labour and for a long time. That the students are putting some effort into this. It's not happening overnight. And they're hearing from the mouths of pure devotees about other pure devotees, the activities, the character of pure devotees. And then it describes the quality of a pure devotee, that within their heart they're always thinking of the lotus feet of the personality of Godhead. In the purport, Prabhupada talks about transcendental students. So I was thinking there's sort of two meanings in that word. The word caught me when I saw it. I was thinking like you could say music students or art students. It describes the students, but they're transcendental students. So there's two meanings. Students who are studying transcendental topics, and that the students exhibit transcendental qualities. They're transcendental students. The spiritual master inspires his students to be free of the lower material influences. That's how they become transcendental. Excuse me. So how is that done? The Vedic process, or we could say the yogic process, includes various activities that the spiritual master gives us to train us, to get us out of the lower modes, including rising early, following regulative principles, abstaining from certain foods and various activities. And on the positive side, they're sort of do-nots, or some of them are do's. On the positive side, to maintain our sadhana, or spiritual practices. So the students are qualified to hear these transcendental messages. There has to be like an equation where the speaker has to be qualified, the spiritual master has to be qualified, but also the students have to be qualified to hear these messages. So I was thinking, obviously there are many sorts of students these days. Not all students can be described as transcendental. Without even, like, if you go into a local school, it probably would be the last word you would think of to describe the students there. In fact, I remember talking to someone that students in schools don't even have that conception that they're students, really. They're not thinking, I'm here to learn. They're here to do so many things, and learning's probably way down the list. Nor do they have any attitude of like, I'm open to the teacher, I want to hear. They're there because they're caught in the throes of adolescence and puberty. There are so many things going on, and if you're lucky, a tiny little bit of learning might happen. So I was thinking in India, there are various teachers or gurus of different traditions, teaching different things. And some of these teachers have their own ashrams or schools. Like, for example, there's a famous Indian musician. He's famous for playing Indian flute. He has his own ashram, has his own students. The students live there under the guidance of the spiritual master. They chant mantras even. But they're not transcendental students. That's not their goal. They are not there to study topics of transcendence. I was thinking, okay, here, we're not saying that say if they're there studying music, that can't be transcendental, but there's qualifications that if it's carried out with connection to the Supreme, fine. But if that music, if what they're studying has no connection with the Supreme, it's not transcendental. So the verse refers to students studying transcendental topics. And I was thinking, like all of you here, every student here has come along to hear topics from the spotless Purana, the Bhagavad Purana, that are transcendental, that are not of this world. Hearing from the spiritual master is not done overnight. It said, with great labor and for a long time, they must hear. You don't go and meet a spiritual master and hear in one session. The verse talks of this great labor for a long time. We chant the verse which is in the Bhagavatam, Nasta prayashu abhadrishu, nityam bhagavata sevaya, bhagavati utama shloki bhakti bhavati naishtiki. We used to chant that verse before chanting the Bhagavatam. So that verse, the translation is, by regularly hearing the Bhagavatam, rendering service unto the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is practically destroyed. Loving service unto the glorious Lord who is praised with transcendental songs is established, as an irrevocable fact. But it's that first line is important, isn't it? By regularly hearing the Bhagavatam, rendering service unto the pure devotee. When those two things go on, this verse guarantees us all that is trouble to the heart, and we all know what that's about. All that is troublesome to the heart is practically destroyed, and loving service unto the glorious Lord is established as an irrevocable fact. So we must regularly hear from the Srimad Bhagavatam and render service to the devotees. Srila Prabhupada comments, this person who's speaking, he must be a practical Bhagavata, someone living the process. It's no good hearing from just a professional person, for example. For example, in the Bhagavatam, Sudha Goswami, who is the speaker of the Bhagavatam, is described as a learned and pure devotee of the Lord because the personality of Godhead is his chief object of service. This attitude is the central thrust of his life. This attitude of service and worship of the Lord is the central thrust of his life. This is how the word pure is defined. So this we understand from Prabhupada there is the person Bhagavat, someone who carries out represents the tradition of the Bhagavatam, of Bhagavan. He's in relation with Bhagavan, and there is the book Bhagavan. So back to this idea of the speaker of transcendental knowledge having to be qualified. One of the times that the Bhagavatam was spoken was in the forest of Naimisharanya, what is now called India. So I may think, well, if I get a ticket and go to India, then surely I'm going to hear the real deal. There'll be somebody speaking there, and they've got a grey beard maybe. They're going to look like a real sadhu. But Prabhupada warns us there are these gatherings in India called Bhagavad Saptahas, where a professional reader speaks on the Bhagavatam for 7 days non-stop. This is in imitation of Maharaj Pariksit hearing the Bhagavatam for 7 days because he only had 7 days to live. So he heard constantly. But in India you can go and they have these professional reciters. You give them some money and they will recite the Bhagavatam for 7 days. And Prophet says, but after finishing the show, both the audience and the speaker become again engaged in their material activities as usual. So there's no change of the heart has gone on. I've paid my money, the speaker has come and gone, and then I'm back to my material activities. So here in the West we also have professional academics and professors who lecture on things like Eastern mysticism. You can go to a university and study stuff like that. And they lecture to a student audience that is equally materially absorbed, that it cannot derive any real benefit from such discourses. I remember hearing, there's one very senior devotee in our movement called Rabindra Swarup, who was an academic and who'd studied traditions of religion and religious philosophy at university and what have you, and he'd studied Sanskrit, and he'd studied under some of these professors. And remember him saying that at the end of their class, they'd all meet maybe for a drink of wine or something like that, and the professor would light up his pipe. So this is the quality of this sort of speaking. It's not going to change your heart. The underlying principle here is that these spiritual practices, like in the Bhagavatam or the Bhagavad Gita, have certain qualities that have to be there to be genuine and to have an effect on us. They have to be free from the contamination of material qualities. Like the speaker, maybe he's interested in getting some fame, some wealth, material qualities. Before Prabhupada had published his Gita, I remember hearing that he said some lady asked him if he could recommend, because his Gita wasn't in existence, if he could recommend an edition, and I was thinking we should point out here that he's being asked to recommend an edition that's available in the West. There are obviously bona fide Vaishnavas studying bona fide Bhagavad Gita in India, but at least available in English in the West. Prabhupada said he couldn't recommend a single edition. So what is the proof that, because there are many editions of the Bhagavad Gita. I remember Penguin Books used to have an edition of the Bhagavad Gita. All sorts of editions. So what is the proof up to that time that in the West these editions weren't authorized? So not one of these editions of Bhagavad Gita that were available in the West had ever produced a single devotee of Krishna. And when you think of that, that's the central theme of the Bhagavad Gita, isn't it? Become my devotee, worship me, give up other varieties of religiosity, become my friend, just worship me, become my devotee. So all these books of Bhagavad Gita had never produced a devotee of Krishna. The Bhagavatam saying in today's verse, we have to hear from the mouths of pure devotees. What is their character? How do they act? So Prabhupada comments on the qualification of Sutta Goswami that the speaker of the speaker of the activities of the Krishna should only have one object of worship and service, that is of Krishna. That's the central thrust of his life or her life, to worship the Supreme Lord, to offer service to the Supreme Lord and the devotees of the Supreme Lord. And the audience, he said, the audience for such topics should be anxious to hear about the Supreme Lord. Prabhupada goes on, when you have a qualified speaker and a qualified audience, he said there can be discourses on transcendence. The discourses between the saints at Naimisharanya and Sutta Goswami are on the transcendental level. There's no motive going on there for material gain. Actually, I read in a verse last night, there weren't just sadhus there listening. It said there were kshatriyas, vaishyas, there were sudras listening. A whole group of people listening. But certainly thousands of sages were listening with no motive for material gain. Prabhupada says, in such discourses, unlimited transcendental pleasure is relished by both the audience and by the speaker. And he says, and therefore they can continue these topics for thousands of years. So we could ask then, do these pure devotees have desires? We say yes. It's not that they become desireless. Our aim is not to become artificially desireless. Our aim is to desire to please Krishna. There is a story I remember hearing many years ago of some yogi who people were venerating in India. He was apparently famous there. And it's described that if you put money near his hand would recoil away from the money, which supposedly showed that he was desireless. But Prabhupada commented, he said, I can use unlimited funds in the service of Krishna. Whatever you can come up with, he says, we can use it in the service of Krishna. Because it's all Krishna's energy to begin with. I was thinking there's a story or an analogy we used to have as young devotees. It's like if you find a wallet laying on the ground. There are various reactions to that, aren't there? So one reaction is like a thief. You look around quickly. If no one's watching, grab the wallet and stick it in your pocket and hurry off. Hope no one saw you. Another reaction would be, I look at the wallet. Oh, no, it's not mine. I have nothing to do with it. I just keep going. But there's a third reaction, that I could pick up the wallet. Actually, this happened to me once. I lost my wallet somewhere. Someone picked it up and took it to the local police station. I was very grateful. So this is our understanding that whatever energy is there, we're not trying to renounce it. Our aim is to use it in Krishna's service. Today's verse also says that the personality of Godhead who awards his devotees liberation. We hear this word liberation a lot in circles of people who are interested in spiritual life. It's often put forward as the final goal, yeah? I want to become liberated. Liberation means that I'm no longer suffering the miseries of material failures and the other distresses that I go through when I'm immersed in the material world with my material desires. But spiritual liberation, it's like getting well after you've been sick. Maybe we've been sick for some time, and finally the doctors have figured out what's wrong, or what I've stayed in bed long enough, whatever, and now I'm feeling well again. So there's a happiness that comes with that, isn't there? Just feeling well. You're happy about that. I'm not sick anymore. But then the question is, what's next? So now what am I going to do now that I'm feeling well? How am I going to act? Prabhupada comments that the Brahmanandis who meditate on just on liberation, becoming free from material energy, just meditating on Brahman, he said that it's unnatural because the soul by nature is full of desires. He says because it's unnatural, that position is very difficult to maintain. He said the Brahmanandis will fall down again, and they'll do like philanthropic activities because it's positive. They do something, but because they're in this state of nirvisesha, which means there's no varieties, it's not natural for the spirit soul. The other day I was near a bookstore. I was looking, they had piles of books. So there was a copy of that famous old book, Jane Eyre, by Charlotte Bronte. I've never personally read it, but it's like one of the classics of English literature. And on the back of the book, there was like a big blow-up quote. And she said, this is from the author, Charlotte Bronte, she said, "It is in vain to say human beings ought to be satisfied with tranquility." She said, "They must have action, and they will make it if they can't find it." So this is our philosophy. The soul is described as anandamaya abhyasat, isn't it? That is full of bliss. That is always seeking bliss. It's always seeking ananda. The soul wants to be joyful and happy. So that's what we're always looking for, that taste. As it says in the verse we chant each morning, that we get that taste for which we're always anxious. It comes from the holy name. It only comes from that. That taste for which I'm always anxious, I'm not finding it out there. In one of the Prabhupada's translations of one of the songs, he said, imagine you're walking through the desert and you're hot and thirsty, you're dying of thirst, and someone says, oh, here's a teaspoon of water. You're like, I don't want a teaspoon. I want to dive in. I need unlimited oceans of pleasure. That's what I'm looking for, not a teaspoon. So, how to uncover our real selves, our real natures? To go forward in a positive direction, we have to understand then, so what is our real identity? How can we use our energies in a positive way, in a transcendental fashion or spiritual fashion? So, of course, Prabhupada advises us. Regular hearing of mantra is required, Vedic mantra. He said this chanting of verses, like today's verse in the Bhagavatam, mantras, is also hearing the Vedic mantra. And we know that word mantra is made up of those two parts of the word, man and tra, yeah? Man, which refers to the mind, and tra, which means it's being delivered. We are being delivered from the incessant chattering of the uncontrolled mind. That's the mantra. We all experience that. There's nobody here who says, oh no, my mind's not like that. Everybody's mind's just... There are many references in the ancient texts, in the Vedic literatures, that the Maha Mantra is the most important of all the different mantras. There's various Vedas where it's described that of all the different mantras, this Maha Mantra. And Prabhupada said it's the process, this Maha Mantra, it's saying to us, get up, get up, get up. Awaken. Like we chant in the Sishakshtam every morning. Chaito Darpanam Manjanam Baba Mahadivagninivapanam. So Chaita Darpanam, that means that's the mirror of the heart. Chaito Darpanam. Marjanam means cleansing. Bhava is referring to material existence. And Mahadavagni is the great blazing fire of material existence, which we all experience. And Nivapanam means extinguishing. So this verse describes the effect of chanting the Maha Mantra, that the great blazing fire of material existence is extinguished. If we hear and chant this Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, then these mistaken ideas of who I am are cleansed. It's described, that Prabhupada describes the heart or consciousness, he said, it's like a mirror, and he said it stores the impressions of life after life. Like Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita, we have been here for millions of births perhaps, and the heart stores all these impressions. So when I'm thinking of who I am or trying to act according to who I think I am, I'm covered by many, many layers of these material impressions. Lord Caitanya describes that the chanting is like you take a mirror that's covered in dust. You can't see yourself. So the chanting is just like clearing that mirror. The real self is already there. We don't have to establish something new. We just uncover these layers of conditioning that are covering our identity. We're advised, whether we're in a happy condition or a stressful condition, whether you're happy or unset, it says, fill your lips with this holy name. So the central process of any yogic process is to learn to control the mind. If we ask ourselves, in material life, we all experience distress, happiness and distress. So what is it that is putting us into, one moment it seems like a pleasant situation, the next moment a distressful situation? What is it that's putting us in these different situations? It's the mind. There's an English poet, Milton, who said, the mind can make heaven into hell, or it can make hell into heaven. Isn't it? It can be under any circumstance that's facing us, and depending where our mind's at, it can be heaven or hell. It's not depending really on the circumstance. It's depending on where our mind is at. The mind, all of our minds, are influenced by the three modes of material nature: goodness, passion, ignorance. Our mind and consciousness is coloured by the three modes of nature. We're influenced by them. We fluctuate between these different modes. How do we become influenced by the modes? By associating with them. So, for example, what leads us to being influenced by a particular mode? By association. Places, times, people, what we're watching, what we're listening to, the food we eat, the events that surround us, all these, the mind acquires these qualities. For example, the mind in the mode of goodness is sober, clear thinking, peaceful. There is clarity of thought, happiness, satisfaction, focus, concentration, knowledge, steadiness. And also it's described that we can focus on an idea long enough to even ask these questions of who am I? In the other modes, it's all happening just so fast and you're bombarded by so many impressions, we don't have the ability to ask those sort of questions. The mind in the mode of passion is restless, turbulent, extreme desires, agitated, flickering, ambitious. Passions fluctuate between happiness and distress, pleasure and pain. It's absorbed in the pleasures of this world. That's the mode of passion. And the mind in the mode of ignorance is characterized by lethargy, dullness, laziness, violence. It's violent thoughts, morose, sad, bewildered, confused, intoxicated perhaps. And I was listening on the news the other day. Governments all over the world are trying to deal with an epidemic of mental distress, mental health issues. People are mentally suffering. So it describes, that gives you an indication of where most people's minds are at. Prabhupada said the mind is a thing in itself. It is very difficult to control. I like that saying. It's a thing in itself. So the goal of the yogis is to learn to control the mind. Perhaps a lifetime of struggle, like in Radhanath Maharaj's recollections. He talks of going up very high in the Himalayas, and that there are sadhus sitting there by cold streams, practicing meditation for years on end. And why are they doing that? To try to learn to control, to get control over the mind. The mind flits here and there every second. I once Googled how many thoughts do we have in a day, and it seems to range from several thousands and thousands to many tens of thousands, depending on which Google answer you listen to. There's no one answer. But I was thinking, like, you can have multiple layers of thoughts at any one time. You can be standing there in prasadam line. You're waiting to get to get prasadam, but you're also thinking of what happened yesterday and what the person in front of you is doing. And isn't it the mind is full of these thoughts? One of the symptoms of the mode of goodness is that we can experience contentment. The yogi can experience contentment. And on the other hand, someone in the mode of passion, doesn't matter what you have, there is no contentment. Like one of the richest people on the planet, I won't go into names, but this person, you'll know who it is. He's quite old now. He's in his 90s. Just recently, he nearly got remarried. He's in his 90s. The lady in question backed out, apparently. Can't imagine why you wouldn't want to marry a 90-year-old. But you can see, here's someone who's one of the richest people on the planet. And is he content? Is he satisfied? No, because he's still looking, for a partner, not satisfied. So I misidentify with who I really am. Because I identify with the body, I experience bhayam, fearfulness. In the material world, we all experience fearfulness. I'm not independent. I'm thrown about by the material energy, and therefore there's this feeling of bhayam, or fearfulness. I'm fearful that what I have won't last. I'm fearful that the conditions that I don't like will last, that they won't go away. So I'm fearful. Prabhupada said the 4 problems of material life. There's the mating problem, the food problem, the shelter problem, and the fearing problem. And of these different problems, the fearing problem is the worst, because I don't know what change is going to be just around the corner. I don't know what's going to happen next, so I'm fearful. Even though I might claim to be independent of Krishna's energy or of a higher energy, everybody in the material world is under the control of Krishna's energy in the form of, anyone? In the form of Kala. Eternal time is working on all of us. And I looked in the Gita the other day. There's this word that's used to describe time. Inexorable. You know that word? Inexorable means something that's impossible to stop. It's not subject to pleas or entreaties. It totally ignores. The time is relentless. In one of Prabhupada's classes on the Gita, he says this time factor is the representation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Time represents Krishna in the material world. It's, even if I claim I don't believe in God, doesn't matter. You're under that influence at all times. When Krishna showed his Vishvarup form to Arjuna, Arjuna became very afraid. Prabhupada says, he says, "Who are you?" And Krishna responds, "I am time, Kala. I have appeared to destroy." There's a movie out at the moment apparently about Oppenheimer, the scientist, who was one of the scientists who designed the atomic bomb. When he saw the explosion, he's quoted as saying, "Time I am, destroyer of the worlds." So even though I might claim to be independent, that I'm not under anyone's control, I am. I'm under the control, at least under the control of time. In due course, as time marches on, I will be forced out of this body. I'm not the ultimate proprietor of the body. I'm more like a tenant. If you're the proprietor of something, you can't be forced out, isn't it? If you own a building, for example. If you're just renting, the owner of the body can say, no, I need the property back. So I can be forced out of this body at any time. I've been given the use of the body, but I'm not really the proprietor. So bhayam, fearfulness, and the opposite is abhayam, which interestingly is Srila Prabhupada's name was Abhay. Fearful, fearless. We can only become fearless if we are immersed in spiritual activities. So the material energy, as it moves along by time, takes away everything that is superfluous to our real identity. I heard in a class the other day, Burijan Prabhu was saying that time is like a stirring spoon in a pot. So you've got all the sort of material energy that we're involved in, and time just keeps moving it around. It's stirring the pot. That I might find a situation that I think is comfortable. I want this situation to last. But is it going to? That stirring spoon is just working and working. Everything is moving. Change also affects our lives as devotees. But the devotee has the advantage that if we can see Krishna's hand in the things that are befalling us, what's happening in our lives, then we're not disturbed. We can see that Krishna ultimately is looking after me. And whatever befalls me only happens by Krishna's plan. But without a spiritual anchor for people in the outside world, this constant change that's going on makes everyone fearful. We hanker for things that we don't have. We lament for things that we don't. We lament for things that we have lost. So that hankering and lamenting. So everything that is superfluous to my real identity, my possessions, my family, where you live, the country you live, everything is gradually stripped away. You're only left with that original spiritual identity at the end. Finally, even the body will be taken away. So while we're chanting, it's described that we go through different stages. Somebody first comes along, we practice, and we go through these various stages. And it's described by the acharyas that everybody goes through these stages. Prabhupada describes there are 3 stages in chanting. The offensive stage, the stage of lessening the offences or the clearing stage, and the pure stage. When a neophyte takes to the chanting of Hare Krishna, the Hare Krishna mantra, Prabhupada says generally we commit many offences. We know there are 10 basic offences, and that if we practice to avoid these offences, we can come to the clearing stage. Of course, if somebody gets to the pure stage, then it's described this Bhava Mahagni Nivapanam, the effects of the material energy completely gone. But it can take, like Prabhupada said, to get off the bodily platform is a long process, generally. I can certainly swear it's a long process. So, this stages of chanting. The word disciple comes from the word discipline. That the spiritual master gives us discipline that he wants us to follow. We don't follow it, there's no question of following that path. Prabhupada says if you don't follow the process, it's like trying to cook with smoke. Chanting but not following the process is like this, he says. There is some, like if you have wet fuel, there's smoke. There might be some tiny result, but if we're chanting but not following, there's not much result. There might be some heat, but he says you can cook for 300 years. Not much is going to happen. So the offensive stage at the beginning, we don't care perhaps, we're confused. The clearing stage, it's called Namabhasya. In the clearing stage of our chanting, we experience there's good days and not so good days of chanting. We do it anyway. It's interesting, like when the devotees go on Harinam, at the beginning, there's no qualifications for chanting. Someone could come out of a pub and they're rolling around a bit intoxicated, and if they see the devotees and they yell out, Hare Krishna, we're very happy to hear that. But that can't go on as you become aware of what chanting is about. So we can't come immediately to the pure stage, but we can get to the clearing stage if we practice diligently. Bhaktivinoda Thakur says that the inattentiveness in chanting, not really being attentive to what we're chanting, is the root cause of all the other offences. There are different forms of this inattentiveness when we're chanting. Obviously there's sleep, there's distraction, lack of intensity. So there's people, someone might say, well, I don't feel any great emotion when I chant. So there's not a lot we can do about that in itself. But what we can do is to develop this, to be very careful to have attention while we're chanting. And from that close attention, then that feeling comes about. Prabhupada says, whenever there's a prayer, there should be a request or a benediction. There should be a request in that prayer. He said, so we can ask when we're chanting, we can be meditating, to be praying, to be engaged in Krishna's service. So I would finish. There was one last comment from Srila Prabhupada that to me sums it all up. He said, this chanting process. He says we should chant carefully and lovingly. Isn't that nice? It's not some mundane thing that as we chant longer, we experience more of that reciprocation from Krishna. So we should chant carefully but lovingly. Thank you very much, Prabhu. Jai.